The church there, where a number of people and dignitaries, friends, family have been arriving. Alex just set the scene for us.
Hey, Kira, so we are moments away from that hearse carrying the former First Lady Rosalynn Carter pulling in front of the church here at Glenn Memorial United Methodist. But all day today, we've seen the anticipation rising as motorcades for past presidents and other dignitaries have pulled around here. We're expecting, of course, for the Bidens to be in attendance, the Clintons as well, and all living first ladies, former first ladies. I can tell you that we did actually see former President Bill Clinton walk in along with Senator Warnock, as well as a number of others. And we've seen in the last few minutes clergy walk into this church, but certainly a lot of anticipation going into this memorial service, giving a farewell to the former First Lady. And as you mentioned, the former President, Jimmy Carter, her husband of 77 years, certainly wanting to be here. We heard from his grandson, Jason Carter, that he did plan to attend. Jason also telling the New York Times this morning that he's coming to the end and he's very physically diminished. But I think that he would be proud and happy that he was there for her till the very end, and he wasn't going to miss this for anything.
That's his nature to a T. Let's take it to our Steve Osunsami that is there at the Carter Center in Atlanta. And Steve, you know the personality of the former president all too well. You and I both for decades worked there in Atlanta, Georgia, and just watching the former first couple be a part of that community after leaving the White House. And indeed, if you were to pick a word besides very kind, it would be stubborn. And I think there is just no way in that he would ever miss the opportunity for a final and former farewell to his wife and be present at this service today.
I think that's one of the words that I would probably use in interacting with them and watching their relationship. You know, he being stubborn, but she also, you know, being able to get him to do things. You know, people didn't call her the Steel Magnolia for nothing. You know, she was very much a part of course, their success. She was a part of their success leading to the White House and, of course, in their public life after the White House. And, you know, in watching them interact, it was a pleasure to see the twinkle in his eye that never diminished as he laid eyes upon his wife all those years that lasted well into their 90s, of course. You know, it was one of those things where you look at their relationship and you want to learn, you know, from them in terms of how to make it last, how to keep that love alive for so long. They are very emblematic of that. You know, and of course, you know, as Jason Carter, their grandson, has said today, that all eyes are now, of course, on the former president. There is the concern that with the love of his life gone, you know, how will he fare? A man who is already in hospice care, who is 99 years old, who was determined to make it here to Atlanta, some 3 hours away, to say goodbye to his wife here and to say thank you to the world leaders, current and former, who are here today. You know, one little thing we learned today, we learned that the former president, that he had a suit made because his old suits didn't fit because he's lost so much weight. But that's how stubborn, is the word we'll use, that he was about making sure that he was able to come here. We're told that he traveled here with a doctor. And of course, there is plenty of help to get him in and out of the churches as he is needed.
There was a difference in opinion, though, as to whether the former president should even be here, right, Steve?
There was, and he clearly won that argument. He won. He's here. He won that argument. He wasn't going to let this day pass. And you know, the former president is we're going to see for sure when we see him on video. That was what we were told. There was real no official confirmation from the Carter Center about his arrival. They were looking at it as a game day decision about whether or not he would attend the services, but it's very clear what his wishes were. You know, I have a small little story when I interviewed him a few years ago with his wife, with Mrs. Carter, and they gave us a set amount of time, and Mrs. Carter and I were continuing to talk, and we were sort of exhausting the amount of time that we had, and the former president said, you know, time's up. He got up and decided that they were leaving, they were out, and they shuffled out of there and went home, and you know, what he said went. And that's probably what happened today.
I can just, I can see it, I can imagine it. And I think you've earned the right to do that, Steve, when you've been married for 77 years and lived the life that they have lived. When time is up, and they probably want to get back home and just relax. And by the way, you had the last television interview that they ever gave together. It was beautiful, and what a pleasure to have not only in our archives, but in your repertoire as a correspondent. Pretty special to be able to talk about that and just the memories of that. I also want to bring in our contributor and Washington Post reporter, Mary Jordan, and she has covered the Carters for decades. And Mary, I know that you want to talk about Jimmy Carter as well, but if we could just take it back for a moment and talk about when the Carters first came to the White House. And, you know, I remember the talk in our family and across the country about sort of these sweet and simple Southerners that were coming in the White House, and could they do it, and could they handle the pressure, and were they the right people to be in the White House? But it did not take long for this couple that was running a peanut farm in Georgia to win over the hearts of so many people.
And they certainly didn't win over everybody. I mean, when you look back at the late 70s when they were in office, a lot of people thought they were kind of goofy, didn't know what they were doing, newbies. And he eventually was a one-term president, defeated by Ronald Reagan. He had the hostage Iran crisis. He had an energy crisis. But as time went on, there has been a rethink about the Carter years, because it turned out that many of the things that Carter was saying then, like the environment, like getting different energy sources. He was the guy that put solar panels on the White House and was mocked by people. You know, now today, everybody wants to get them, and there's government tax breaks for them. So there's still some people that don't think he was a great president, for sure. But I think even those people have had enormous respect for how he has spent his post-presidency. Decades of working around the world in every continent for eradicating diseases, promoting democracy. I saw him in Managua in Nicaragua, where he was one of the 30 countries that both Rosalynn and Jimmy went to promote democracy and free elections. They never stopped, you know, they didn't go to Club Med or put their feet up. And I think that's why Jimmy Carter won the Nobel Prize. And when he did, the first thing he said was, it's his wife's prize, too.
And we can't forget also the Presidential Medal of Freedom that she received in 1999. Mark Updegrove, your presidential historian for us, also one of our contributors. They really did, I guess it's fair to say, moved out of the White House and became missionaries of really for what they did across the world and even here back at home and in the home state of Georgia, from Habitat to Humanity all the way to what Mary has talked about that they did internationally.
Very well put, Kira. That's exactly right. I think they left, as Mary mentioned, they left defeated. After one term in the White House, Jimmy Carter was defeated by Ronald Reagan rather handily in 1980. They moved back to Plains, Georgia, to a home they hadn't lived in 10 years, this very modest home that they had built in 1961. And President Carter called that an altogether unwanted life. And Rosalynn Carter was particularly despondent at that time, didn't know what the next chapter of her life would hold. In fact, she said that she had gone from being in the center of these big decisions, world decisions, going back to Plains, where the biggest decision she would have to make is whether the brick path that they were building to their home would be crooked or straight. That was the biggest decision. So when the Carter Center was launched in 1982, I think it gave both of them new meaning and purpose. And to your point earlier, Kira, it allowed them to be humanitarians to the world. President Carter once told me he wanted to be known for peacemaking and human rights. He certainly made contributions, both of them did in the White House, but what they did in the through the Carter Center in the post-White House years was remarkable in its own right and did allow them to make an enormous mark on the world in peacemaking and human rights. Kira?
And as we're following just live pictures right now inside the church, we're seeing a number of people, dignitaries. You see a lot of family and friends already that have arrived. But the governor of Georgia sat down just recently, including Senator Warnock as well. And we are just waiting for the church to fill and the memorial service to begin. And we will listen in. I want to bring in our Chief Global Affairs Correspondent, Martha Raddatz. She's here in Washington with us and just talking about all the First Ladies that will be attending. Martha, pretty remarkable. And also the first time we're going to see Melania Trump in a very long time make a public appearance.
In a very long time, but every one of these First Ladies owes something to Rosalynn Carter, owes something to her for her trailblazing, for her dedication to the job of First Lady and trying to change it and expand it. And all of the First Ladies who will be there today, Hillary Clinton, Laura Bush, Michelle Obama, Melania Trump, as you mentioned, and of course, Dr. Jill Biden. I think about Dr. Biden, who is still teaching. That would seem impossible back in the years of Rosalynn Carter as First Lady. But when she was there, she was very devoted to being something more than just an arm partner to the president. She had an office. She worked full-time all day on mental health and other issues. And she also, when you look back at her history, and I love looking back at the fact that once she married Jimmy Carter and he was in the Navy, in those years, being a Navy wife is challenging in itself, but she loved it. And one of the reasons she loved it is because she had independence. She was away from Plains, Georgia. She was away from her own mother. She was away from Jimmy Carter's mother. And she could really be herself. So when she learned that they would be going back to run the peanut farm, she was angry about that. And she told Jimmy Carter that. And she didn't want to go because she didn't want to go back to being that small town girl. But she was, and she did, and she made something of that. And when I look at this couple, when I look at the Carter presidency and what he did, I really think, and of course, Mark Updegrove tells us the greatest accomplishment in peacemaking and humanitarian work, and that is all true, but is also just the devotion to one another, the reality of their relationship. And they were very honest about it. They were honest when things weren't going well or that they had had some fights about things. And yet, at the bottom of all of that, what they really, truly loved about each other was their own devotion to one another and the respect they had for one another. They were all about respect. And in respect, of course, you can fight or you can love, but in the end, you come out of it okay. And I think we've talked about the fact that Rosalynn Carter, one of the things in that marriage is that they would never go to bed angry. They would always try to work things out. And they had a plan to make their relationship great. They would share so many things, and yet Rosalynn Carter maintained her independence throughout their marriage. She wasn't always with Jimmy Carter. She had her own life. She wasn't just Mrs. Rosalynn Carter. She was Rosalynn Carter by herself, making her own way. She loved doing what Jimmy Carter loved, but she also loved things on her own. She loved Habitat for Humanity. And I watched them help build a house once down there in Georgia as well, and seeing them together and seeing the love they had, but also that independence, that very distinct personality that each of them had. You talk about them both being stubborn, and they were stubborn people about what they thought was right. That's why they were stubborn. What they thought was right, the right thing to do, the right kind of people they should be, and that is something they really lived by. Kira?
So well said, Martha. And Mary, I want to follow up on that. If you think about how independent Rosalynn Carter was, that came, I mean, from her childhood. When she lost her father at the age of 13, she grew up in such a humble environment, wearing the dresses that her mom made, a dressmaker, her father a bus driver, a mechanic, who always said he wanted more for her daughter. And Rosalynn Carter has talked about that, the influence that her father had on her, and where that world got bigger. Of course, she excelled in high school and went on and got an incredible education. But when she met Jimmy Carter, this young, handsome gentleman at the Naval Academy, and the two of them became one, it's pretty remarkable what they did together as a couple. And Martha, talking about their marriage in 77 years and being very transparent about when times were tough. And they put a lot of survival techniques came from their faith.
You know, she grew up 3 miles in Plains, Georgia from Jimmy. They were similar in so many ways. They were both the oldest of 4 children. But in other ways, Rosalynn was quite different. First of all, Jimmy was wealthier. His family had a farm. And as you said, that her father died and she had to start working, you know, as a young teenager. And she had to help her mom, who then went to work at the post office, working. So she was always resourceful. She was always kind of in charge, even at a young age. And she went to school, it mattered. And she was the valedictorian at her high school. Jimmy always said, you know, how smart she was. And there was enormous respect for her brain, her smarts, and how studious she was. People remember when she was on the campaign trail in the 70s and then later at the White House, that she just never stopped making campaign calls, calling for Jimmy, you know, drawing diagrams about what they should do. She had meetings with the National Security Advisor, which was pretty controversial at the time. You know, here was this unelected woman, the spouse, and there were plenty of people who didn't think that it was a woman's place. But she did. She knew that she was the closest advisor. She believed in Jimmy Carter, and she would do anything to help him. And he opened the door. He said to the National Security Advisors, "You have to brief her." He said, "She is coming to the cabinet meetings." And that ushered in a whole new era. You know, it was years later when people were still giving Hillary Clinton grief about when she was saying you get 2 for 1. Well, and she was many years before kind of paving the way. She was always high on women's rights and campaigning for that. And I think the reason it worked was that her husband also believed in her magic. And he felt that he wasn't as good without her as he was with her. And so they were always together. I mean, I saw them in many countries. I was a foreign correspondent. They would show up. They were in North Korea when I was in Tokyo. They came to Tokyo. They were in Latin America when I was posted in Latin America. You know, I think that wasn't the case with other ex-presidents. Sometimes they would go on some missions, but it was rare to see that it was always the 2 Carters together.
Mary, only if every marriage could be like that. Would that just be incredible? Mark Updegrove, I want to bring you in on that and just play off what Mary was saying. How do you think Rosalynn Carter was the right First Lady at the right time. And when you think about all the societal shifts that were taking place in the 70s and the 80s.
You know, one of the things is she was very independent, as we discussed, and we saw in the 1970s a growing women's rights movement based on independence. And so this is a woman who was right for the times in many respects, but also right for her husband. She understood they came from the same place. This is remarkable to me, Kira. Miss Lillian, the mother of Jimmy Carter, delivered Rosalynn Smith in 1927, in August of 1927. It is remarkable the fact that just several days later, Miss Lillian introduced young Jimmy Carter, 3 years old, to the newest citizen of Plains, Rosalynn Smith, who he would eventually marry. They have been together from the very beginning. Jimmy Carter has known Rosalynn Smith, who would become Rosalynn Carter, from the very beginning. So this is a long-standing partnership. When we talk about the trust that they had in one another, they knew each other's families, where they came from. They knew everything about one another. So he was the perfect partner for Jimmy Carter as well. But it bears mentioning, too, that while a lot is emphasized about the fact that she was her husband's closest confidant and counselor and advisor, he was also, you also have to note that she did the work alongside him. She worked hard. Every time he went to a meeting with a foreign dignitary, she was there taking notes. In the post-presidency, when he was banging nails for Habitat for Humanity, she was alongside him banging nails as well. When he was going abroad to eradicate diseases in the third world, she was with him. She was doing the work as well as being her husband's closest counselor and confidant. It is a remarkable partnership in every respect, Kira.
Well, we have now seen the hearse pull up in front of the church there. Reverend Mark Westmoreland, the pastor of Glen Memorial, he will be giving the call to worship, also the invocation, followed by the opening remarks by Pastor Tony Loudon, former president and Mrs. Carter's personal pastor. You can see them, they are lined up now, getting ready to receive her casket. Alex Perche is there just outside the church, and I'm not sure if we are able to, okay, I'm not sure if we can hear anything, but we are now seeing actually all the first ladies that have now arrived. You can see them sitting there in the front row, along with former President Bill Clinton. Also, you can see President Joe Biden there. Quite a sight to see them all together there in the front row. Alex Perche, you are just outside the Memorial Church, Glen Memorial Church. Tell us just what it's been like for the past, 5-10 minutes or so, as everybody has been arriving, the first ladies, the presidents, and now the hearse.
Hey, Kira, so I stepped outside just as you're seeing the color guard take the casket out of the back of that hearse. The honorary pallbearers today are all of the Carters' surviving grandchildren. And so, you know, we've seen this anticipation, that hearse positioned just off the side of the church for a number of minutes now. But as you see, the color guard lifting that casket out of the back, they're going to turn and walk it into that church that's already filled with a number of dignitaries, a number of presidents, current and past, and also all of those former first ladies, as well as Dr. Jill Biden. But I can tell you that even looking around here, behind the camera here, just outside of Emory's campus, I'm seeing a number of folks who have gathered around the barricades, just trying to get a glimpse of what's going on here today. There was a lot of anticipation, certainly recognizing this moment in history. It's a very Georgia story, and so we're seeing quite a turnout here today.
Let's just take a moment to pause and listen and live in the moment here. Well, this is a pretty remarkable moment to see here at the Glen Memorial Church, where the service is about to begin for Rosalynn Smith Carter. You can see the former president, Jimmy Carter, right there in front, in between his daughter and his son in the front row. You see the former first ladies, you see the president of the United States, you see former President Bill Clinton, but you see former President Jimmy Carter in hospice himself after being married to his wife for 77 years, his chief advisor, his soulmate, the love of his life. He was determined to be here at the service, and he is there. Let's listen in.
This is an ABC News special report.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We are coming on the air for a celebration of life honoring former First Lady Rosalynn Carter. A memorial service is now underway at Glen Memorial Church at Emory University there in Atlanta, Georgia. Former President Jimmy Carter making a rare public appearance, arriving just moments ago. The former president, now 99 years old, currently under hospice care, but he was determined to be here today. As you know, the Carters were inseparable during their time together. Jimmy and Rosalynn, both childhood sweethearts, married for 77 years. He said that they were equal partners in everything he accomplished. Rosalynn Carter remembered a lifetime of public service, humanitarian work, improving mental health services, and helping transform the role of First Lady. Also attending today's service, President Biden and current First Lady Jill Biden, the Clintons, Michelle Obama, former First Lady Melania Trump making a rare public appearance. Mrs. Carter died at the age of 96. Her private funeral is set for tomorrow at the small town church in Plains, Georgia, where the former president taught Sunday school for many years. Then Rosalynn Carter will be buried at the Carter's home near the pond where she and her husband used to fish together. Let's get right to ABC's Steve Osunsami there in Atlanta, right by the Carter Center, as he's watching these remarkable pictures as well. There was a difference in opinion, Steve, as to whether the former president should be there, but he was determined to be there, right there in the front row, and he won.
He won. He absolutely won. He wanted to say goodbye in front of all of these distinguished people from around the world, former world leaders. He had a new suit made because his old suit didn't fit him well. His family members sort of prepared us for seeing him on this occasion. You can see that he has gotten older. He is in hospice care, as you've shared. He is 99 years old, hoping to make it to 100. But, you know, when we last talked with him a couple of years ago, he talked about how marrying Rosalynn was the best decision of his life. And she talked about what a wonderful journey that she was on with him and how they were getting through the sunset of their lives by going through that period together. So it is, of course, heartbreaking to see the former president watching his wife from this distance, but at the same time heartwarming because you know that he loved her so.
So true, Steve. And you had the last television interview they ever gave, and you were able to observe that and be a part of that love in that final interview. I want to bring in ABC's contributor and also Washington Post reporter Mary Jordan, who has covered the Carters for decades. And Mary, as we look at these pictures, I know you're looking at the former president saying, do not underestimate him. He is all there mentally, even though physically he may not look so well. I think that is a remarkable point to make, in addition to, as you have covered all the first ladies and you have written the book, seeing them all sitting there together, each one of them owing something to Rosalynn Carter.
Well, first on Jimmy Carter, it is, I talked to Jason Carter, the grandson, just before the service began this morning. He'll be speaking at it. And he said that, you know, right after Rosalynn passed away, his grandfather, Jimmy, was what he called, he said, deep sorrow. And another family member said he was almost silent for the first few days. But they both said that he has rallied now, and everyone has told him how proud they are because he got what he wanted. He really wanted, because Rosalynn had dementia, and he felt that he should outlive her and protect her. And he set that as a goal, and he's pretty proud of it. And so recently he's rallied and he said, I'm going to go, I'm going to do this. And he's eating again. And most of all, he's sharp. I mean, physically, he was in much worse shape than his wife was. And, you know, sadly, her mind had all kinds of problems with cognitive decline, and yet he's watching the news. He's watching the next presidential election. He's watching baseball games. As you see him there, he sure looks frail, but this guy who came out of nowhere from the South, from a farm, to be a naval officer, and then a president, and then a world leader who won a Nobel Prize, still remains sharp. And then the other picture there, which is really, I don't think any of us should underestimate in these times of bitter political division, the fact that Melania Trump is standing there says something important. It's, first of all, Rosalynn herself wanted to make sure that despite the political differences between the Trumps and the Carters, Jimmy Carter has criticized her husband, Donald Trump, saying that he was undermining democracy by saying that the elections are not fair. And in turn, Trump has really ridiculed Jimmy Carter. He said he was a lousy president and worse. And so Rosalynn said, times like this are important. The office of the First Lady, the office of the President, is something, it can come and go, Republican, Democrat. We all have our differences, but we have to pull together. And her family said that she specifically hoped that all the First Ladies who were alive would show. And we see there that we do have Republicans and Democrats, and they did indeed show a kind of a wish for Rosalynn Carter.
Mary, thank you. I want to bring in our chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz. She's here in Washington. And Martha, undoubtedly, what we have observed about Rosalynn Carter since the age of 13, when it was just her and her mom after her father had passed, he wanted to see so much more for her, this young Southern girl in a small town. He wanted her to do well in high school, and he wanted her to be educated and for her horizons to become so much more beautiful than what he could give her at the time. And she did that indeed. She not only persevered, but when she met Jimmy Carter, this handsome young Naval Academy student, it changed both of their lives forever.
It certainly did. Her horizons were endless. When she was young, I can't imagine her father ever imagined where she would end up. And of course, marrying Jimmy Carter, she got out of Plains, Georgia. He was in the Navy. He was a submariner. And by the way, the submariners are generally introverts, not Jimmy Carter. He was outgoing and warm and wonderful, and is to this day. But Rosalynn Carter loved being a Navy wife, and that is very difficult. She didn't want to come back to Plains, Georgia. She was finally away from her mom and away from Jimmy Carter's mom, and being very independent, especially as a Navy wife. And they argued about that, Jimmy Carter and Rosalynn, about wanting to go back to Plains. He had to go back and run the peanut farm. It's not what she wanted to do. But boy, when she got back, she put her heart into everything. And when she became First Lady, you know, seeing all those First Ladies together and what Rosalynn Carter meant to them, how she paved the way in so many ways for them to be independent First Ladies, to have their own projects. And there were others before, but Rosalynn Carter really, really made a difference in what she cared about. She was a full partner to Jimmy Carter. She is that one person who told him when she thought he might be wrong or that he might think about something in a different way. And his respect for her was so vast and so deep. When she spoke, he listened. Kira?
And he is listening to his family now, giving remarks and final thoughts there inside the church. Martha, thank you so much. And before we return you to regular programming, we have more breaking news to bring to you right now. We understand that more hostages have now been released. 12 hostages, including 10 Israelis and 2 foreign nationals. They are on their way toward Israeli territory right now. We are looking at these pictures just coming in to ABC News. Let's get right to our Matt Gutman, who is there in Israel. Matt, as we watch these pictures, tell us what we know.
Kara, we know, just as you said, that 12 hostages have been released from Hamas, handed over to the Red Cross. In southern Gaza, we saw the convoy of the Red Cross driving right near the border with Egypt. We understand right now from the Israeli military that they are headed to Israeli territory. There they will be met by a specialized Israeli military unit that has training in dealing with hostages. They'll transfer them to an army base here and then to hospitals in Israel. This is the 5th release in 5 consecutive days. That ceasefire continues to hold for a 5th consecutive day. That, as we understand, CIA Director Burns is in Doha trying to negotiate an extended hostage release period along with an extended ceasefire. Whatever the mechanism is that they are using, it is working. It took a little bit longer over the past couple of days, but this system is working. Hamas, of course, also getting the respite of those 5 days of ceasefire, plus the release of 3 Palestinian prisoners for every Israeli released. So it's over 150 at this point, we understand. And also that allows for the massive influx of aid trucks, at least 200 a day, not enough, but certainly more than it was in the early days of the war. And that has been critical because we understand the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is immense. The UN now saying there are over 1.8 million people who are displaced, 1.1 million, Kira, who are sheltered by the UN alone. Hunger is apparently endemic right now. Infectious diseases also increasing at a very rapid rate, Kira.
And as we watch these pictures, Matt, clearly the elderly, you can see that the most concern has been about the elderly. As we get these pictures, you can see them being brought in by stretchers, also the concern over the children and the health of those as well. We will continue to follow these pictures as they come in, as once again, another group of hostages have been released by Hamas as we enter this ceasefire now in its 5th day. We're going to return to the regular network programming. Our coverage will continue right now with me on ABC News Live. You can also find us on abcnews.com. And of course, David Muir and the entire team will have a complete wrap up on all the news that's been breaking today on World News Tonight. I'm Kira Phillips. So glad you've been with us.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Glad you are continuing to follow our breaking news coverage here, not only on the release of hostages, but we want to take you back to the Memorial Church there in Atlanta, Georgia, where you will see the former President Jimmy Carter there in the front row at the memorial service for his wife. His son, who was sitting right next to him, is now speaking at the podium. You can see Chip there talking about his mother. Let's go ahead and listen in as we follow continuing coverage of this celebration of life.
And go trick-or-treating up and down and talk to people all over the street. She got back to Amy's and was so excited because she'd been out so much and nobody had recognized her. After Dad was put in hospice and my mother was racked with dementia, my siblings, my wife and I, would stay with them so that there would always be a family member around. One day, my mother was sitting with my wife, Becky, and she was reminiscing on what it was like to go to live in Hawaii. And she was talking about learning all the native dances. And she got up from the sofa, pushed her walker away, which she couldn't take a step without, and proceeded to do the hula for 2 or 3 minutes. She grabbed her walker, turned around, sat back on the sofa, and turned to my wife and said, "That's how you do it." I will always love my mother. I will cherish how she and Dad raised her children. They've given us such a great example of how a couple should relate. Let me finish by saying that my mother, Rosalynn Carter, was the most beautiful woman I've ever met, and pretty to look at, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip. Next, we'll have the reading of the Lord's Prayer. Would you read it with me, please? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the glory, and power, and the glory, forever. Amen.
A reading from the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
President Biden, Dr. Biden, President Carter, Jack, Chip, Jeff, Amy, very distinguished guests and friends. Rosalynn Carter was my boss and became my very good friend. She hired me to direct her projects office at the White House and has kept me busy as her volunteer ever since. We shared so many special times together, shopping for beads in a market in Ghana, popping in unannounced to a peer support program in Americus, Georgia, birdwatching at the Carter Center. What a remarkable woman she was. Wife, mother, business manager, political strategist, diplomat, advocate, author. Yet what I remember most about her was her tireless dedication to taking care of others. She was often fond of recalling the time that Margaret Mead came to visit her in the White House. Dr. Mead said to her then, "Our success as a society and our value as individuals must be measured by the compassion we show for the most vulnerable among us." In many ways, Dr. Mead had captured the very essence of Rosalynn Carter. The issues that claimed her time and attention, mental health, support for caregivers, childhood immunization, problems of the elderly, neglected tropical diseases, even building latrines to prevent the spread of trachoma, a blinding eye disease. These were not glamorous or sexy causes, yet she brought critical leadership to problems that impact the lives of millions. Rosalynn's compassion and empathy for those who are suffering was boundless. Her passion for action even more so. I shall never forget the day as First Lady, she decided to personally visit the refugee camps in Thailand, where thousands of Cambodians lay desperately ill and dying. "I have to do something," she said. Rosalynn was determined to help. The doctors in the camps called her the Yankee Angel because she brought hope where there had been none. As a result of her efforts, a broad coalition came together and raised tens of millions of dollars for refugee relief. Her tenure as First Lady of the United States was just one chapter in a life that was really devoted to caring and doing good for others. With President Carter, she founded the Carter Center as one of the world's foremost humanitarian organizations. She invited me one year to join her on a trip promoting guinea worm eradication in West Africa. In a small village in northern Ghana, she insisted I come meet a little boy being treated in a containment center. "You have to see the worm," she said. "You have to see how much suffering it causes." The alleviation of suffering has been an integral part of Rosalynn's life for as long as I've known her. While campaigning for her husband early one morning at a factory gate, a woman covered in cotton dust approached her. "What is your husband going to do as governor of Georgia to help my daughter who is suffering from mental illness?" Thus began her more than 50-year career as a mental health advocate, lobbying first her husband, then the United States Congress, and finally later the WHO to increase support for mental health. When students at her alma mater, Georgia Southwestern, documented the isolation, the stress and burnout that afflicted so many caregivers in their community, she lent her support to the creation of the Rosalynn Carter Institute for Caregivers. Today, it is a national advocate for programs to build resilience and strength in families navigating the daunting challenges of caring for loved ones, a challenge that her own family has confronted with grace these last few years. Even the plight of the monarch butterfly did not escape Rosalynn's attention. Threatened by loss of habitat and in alarming decline, the monarch needed an advocate, and who better than Rosalynn? She first started with her garden in Plains, then she created a butterfly trail across Georgia, and finally, she wrote Michelle Obama that the butterflies needed a garden on the White House grounds. A short time later, there was a garden on the South Lawn. What a remarkable life she led, born at a time and in a place where segregation was the norm. As a young wife, she joined the fight against racial discrimination in her church and her community. Raised during an era when opportunities for women were limited at best, she became an ardent advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment. She ensured that women were well represented in the senior ranks of government, And she even successfully lobbied her husband for equal pay for her East Wing staff, something for which I shall always be grateful. Married at 18 and the mother of 3 little boys by the age of 25, she became an invaluable business partner in the peanut warehouse operation. When Jimmy Carter decided to run for the state Senate without consulting her, the last time he ever did that, she still pitched in as a key campaigner and political strategist, a role in which she excelled in the years that followed. She served our country as one of its most activist and accomplished First Ladies. Her legacy is defined not only by her work in mental health, but also by the multiple roles she played as Jimmy Carter's closest advisor. Personal emissary to the leaders of 7 Latin American countries, consultant on his most important speeches, lobbyist for key legislative initiatives, and spokesperson on controversial policy matters. Once, as she departed for Iowa, just 2 days after the grain embargo had been announced, she quipped, "I happen to always be the first one out after a major decision or happening, but it's interesting." Whether it was the Mideast peace negotiations at Camp David or planning strategy for the Democratic Convention in 1980, Rosalynn was present and a full participant. She loved her time in Washington and was very sad to leave. But she returned to Georgia ready to pursue her passion to, as she once said, use my influence to give voice to those who may be powerless, and persuade the powerful to listen. As I had the privilege of knowing Rosalynn over the years, I was constantly reminded that for her, life was truly about helping others and finding joy in the simple act of service. She never sought fame, fortune, or accolades for the work that she did, although her accomplishments have been widely recognized and honored. In so many different ways, she promoted a more caring society. A number of years ago, at the end of an interview with Jon Stewart, then of The Daily Show, where she had lobbied him to pay more attention to fighting the stigma of mental illness, and even in jest offered to award him a Rosalynn Carter Fellowship to improve his reporting skills. He looked at her and said, "Mrs. Carter, you are truly one of the good people in this world." Today, we do indeed mourn a remarkable person, one of the truly good people in this world. May those of us who knew and loved her as a friend and colleague honor her life by building on her legacy of caring deeply for the most vulnerable among us.
Sweet A reading from the book of Psalm, chapter 19, verse 14. May these words of my mouth and this meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, Lord, my rock and my redeemer.
President Carter, President Biden, Dr. Biden, Vice President Harris, the second gentleman, President Clinton, Secretary Clinton, Mrs. Bush, Mrs. Obama, Mrs. Trump, distinguished guests and friends. Rosalynn Carter would be so pleased to see that she brought all of you together on this day. First, my deepest condolences to you, President Carter, to Jack, to Chip, to Jeff, to Amy, and to your families. I am honored that you asked me to participate today. News reporters and the public figures we cover don't always have the smoothest of relationships. Given the nature of our different roles, our interactions can be uncomfortable at times. The first time I met Miss Carter, it was 1970, when she was campaigning hard for her husband to be elected governor. It was on the tarmac of a small airport somewhere in the middle of Georgia, and I sensed a wariness on her part. I was only a cub reporter for an Atlanta TV station, so that was understandable. I'm happy to say that the wariness melted away. It may have taken about 40 years for that to happen, but it had by the time she invited me to attend a luncheon in Washington where she was receiving an award for her work on caregiving. She knew that we have a son with disabilities and that caregiving is essential in our lives. I know that my respect and admiration for her goes back to the very beginning. There was always something genuine about Mrs. Carter, a groundedness and a quiet self-assurance, despite what she later wrote about her early struggles with public speaking. I covered the Carters through their time as Georgia governor, through the historic and astonishing campaign for the presidency in 1976, through their years in the White House. What we witnessed was a First Lady who saw her role as going well beyond the essential, warm, and welcoming host to being a close and trusted yes advisor. In essence, an extension of the president himself. A First Lady who understood the weight of her words, and especially her actions. A First Lady who cared deeply about the American people, about how government policies and actions affect their daily lives. A First Lady who took on tough assignments, who was, in her words, determined to be taken seriously, and who wasn't afraid of controversy. That started at the very beginning of her time in the White House when, as you heard, she made big news by sitting in on cabinet meetings. As she put it, there was no way I could discuss things with Jimmy in an intelligent way if I didn't. Continuing her push for something to be done about mental health, the issue she had adopted as First Lady of Georgia, she immersed herself in the subject, insisting that ways be found to bring it out of the shadows, to erase the stigma associated with mental illness. She personally lobbied for legislation, and she saw it become law. She launched a childhood immunization initiative that led to the virtual elimination of measles as a public health problem. Just 5 months into the new administration, she took on an ambitious diplomatic mission, that 2-week trip to the Caribbean, Central, and South America that she described as more than a goodwill trip. She said she wanted to be valuable in each country, to bring back their concerns to her husband. She had studied his foreign policy intensely, especially on human rights. She took a cram course in Spanish. I was one of the reporters who traveled with her on that 12,000-mile journey. I had not studied Spanish, and I'll never forget the looks on the faces of some of the Latin leaders as they realized that they were dealing with a serious, supremely well-informed and well-briefed representative of the President of the United States, the person closer to him than anyone else. Criticism ahead of time that she would be dismissed melted away. She lobbied for other important legislation, including one of the earliest efforts to cut the cost of health care, the so-called Hospital Cost Containment Bill. Mrs. Carter was traveling with the president in Japan to attend an economic summit when word came from Washington that they were a few votes shy, including from a senator who was traveling with them on the bullet train to Kyoto. It was Mrs. Carter who spoke to Hawaii's Senator Spark Matsunaga, persuaded him to phone in his proxy. The bill passed. And there was the Middle East. 13 days of tense talks among President Carter, Israel's Menachem Begin, and Egypt's Anwar Sadat. Mrs. Carter was the one who suggested first that they meet at Camp David, noting that it was far removed from the pressures and the controversies of Washington. President Carter said she was a partner in his thinking throughout the negotiations. The Camp David Accords have survived as one of the very few enduring agreements to come out of the Middle East. I last interviewed President and Mrs. Carter together in Plains in July 2021 as they were celebrating their 75th wedding anniversary. I asked them how they thought President Biden was doing early in his term. President Carter was very specific on issue after issue and quite complimentary of the new president. Mrs. Carter said simply, "It's a great relief to have him in office." And what a love story. For 77 years, they adored each other and had much in common: intelligence, compassion, curiosity, courage, and apparently they could both be a little stubborn. She often said the most challenging time of their marriage was when they co-authored a book. My connection with President and Mrs. Carter is more than professional. It was the summer of 1976 when I met my husband, Al Hunt, who was then with the Wall Street Journal, on the Plains High School athletic field, where competitive then-candidate Jimmy Carter organized softball games between his campaign staff, with a lot of help from the very fit Secret Service agents, and on the other side, the press corps. The press always lost. Al and I didn't see each other again until the spring of 1977, after NBC News moved me to Washington to cover the White House. You know, if Jimmy Carter hadn't been elected, we would likely never have gotten married, had 3 children, and a grandson. So as fate and only 1,683,247 votes would have it, our lives are connected with theirs. When Jimmy Carter was running for president the first time, a reporter asked Rosalynn why she was campaigning 5 days a week, 20 hours a day. Her answer: "It's a labor of love. Besides, I won't have any regrets if he loses, because I am doing everything I can possibly do." That, to me, explains why she did so much, worked so hard throughout her entire life. At the White House and in the many years before and since, championing the rights of the underserved, coming to the aid of the most vulnerable, doing whatever she could to improve the lives of others, so she wouldn't have regrets that she hadn't done everything in her power to do. That's who she was. Without Rosalynn Carter, I don't believe there would have been a President Carter. She and the two of you set an example for all of us. I agree with my friend Jim Fallows, who wrote, "Her memory will be a blessing. Her influence on the world will be her monument," end quote. Because of Rosalynn Carter, millions of lives are better off. What a gift she left.
I chose something that is hard to read without crying, so be patient. My mom spent most of her life in love with my dad. Their partnership and love story was a defining feature of her life. Because he isn't able to speak to you today, I am going to share some of his words about loving and missing her. This is from a letter he wrote 75 years ago while he was serving in the Navy. My darling, every time I have ever been away from you, I have been thrilled when I returned to discover just how wonderful you are. While I am away, I try to convince myself that you really are not, could not be, as sweet and beautiful as I remember. But when I see you, I fall in love with you all over again. Does that seem strange to you? It doesn't to me. Goodbye, darling. Until tomorrow. Jimmy.
What wondrous love is this, O my soul, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, O my soul? What wondrous love is this that was the Lord of bliss to bear the dreadful curse for my soul, for my soul, to bear the dreadful curse for my soul. When I was sinking down, sinking down, sinking down, when I was sinking down, oh my soul. When I was sinking down beneath God's righteous frown, Christ laid aside his crown for my soul, for my soul. Christ laid aside his crown for my soul. To God and to the Lamb I will sing. To God and to the Lamb, to the
A reading from the book of Galatians, chapter 5, verses 13 to 14. Serve one another humbly in love, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself.
Thank you all for being here. As you can see from the service, music was so important to my grandmother, and it's been just beautiful. So thank you. Governor and First Lady Kemp, thank you. Senators Warnock and Ossoff, thank you. Congress people, Mayor Dickens, thank you all. And again, a special thank you, Secretary Clinton, Mrs. Bush, Mrs. Obama, Mrs. Trump, and Dr. Biden. Thank you all for coming and acknowledging this remarkable sisterhood that you share with my grandmother. And thank you all for your leadership that you provided for our country and the world. Secretary Clinton and Dr. Biden, we also welcome your lovely husbands. I mean, this is a difficult day for my family, but we have been so enormously gratified by the love and support that we have felt from across the world. So thank you so much. And as Reverend Warnock told me, my grandmother doesn't need a eulogy. Her life was a sermon. And it was a mighty testament to the power of faith and to the power of a deep and determined love. And she lived this public love story that we all know of, that has inspired the world, including in these last days. And I think of all the things she accomplished, her most viral moment was when they were at a baseball game and the Braves put them on the kiss cam. And just like today, I mean, people were crying at the Braves game, you know. But we heard about it for years. It's amazing. But in my family, we all experienced those more private love stories. And she was my grandmother first. And she was like everyone else's grandmother in a lot of ways. Almost all of her recipes call for mayonnaise, for example. We all got cards from her on our birthdays, $20 bill in it. When I was 45, $20 bill. Like, and she was so down to earth, y'all. It was amazing. And one of the stories we've been talking about in my family these last few days is we were on a family trip and we were on a flight on Delta from here to somewhere, and we were all sitting in the back of the airplane together, and it took off, and we looked over. My grandmother took out this Tupperware of pimento cheese and this loaf of bread, and she just started making sandwiches. And she gave it to all of us grandkids and everyone else, and then she just started giving them to other people on the plane. And people were sitting there like, Rosalynn Carter just made me this sandwich, you know? And they couldn't believe it, but she loved people. And she was a cool grandma. She was cool, like, she did Tai Chi with this sword. And if you want to see a 5-year-old boy be excited, they would come back, Dad, you know Mom Carter has a sword, you know? She once told me about this trip, Papa, that y'all took to Havana in the 50s. She said, y'all went down there for the night and you didn't get a hotel room. And I said, what'd you do? She looked at me like, we danced. We slept on the plane. They danced, didn't they? She was a rock for our family, and that's true, but in many ways she was more, as Chip said, an adventurer, a voyager, a mountain climber. She learned to ski in her 60s and then skied for 25 more years. As Chip said, she fished trout streams from Georgia to Wyoming and from Venezuela to Siberia, visited 120 countries, climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Fuji and summited peaks in Bolivia and other places. And I know that she went to the Everest base camp in Nepal. And I can guarantee you that she was looking up at that thing and thinking, if they would just let me. And based on what she did, I think she could have done it. She was born just a few years after women got the right to vote in this small town in the South where people were still plowing their fields behind mules. But she was made for these long journeys, and she was made to summit these mountains. As they said before, when she started in politics, she'd never talked to a group of people bigger than her Sunday school class. And then she elected a governor and a president. She shaped our national policies. She faced down dictators herself on issues of human rights. She built the Carter Center from an idea into a powerhouse for human rights. And as the chair of that board, I've watched her do it, and it's because she poured out her love. All over the world, and especially, as Kathy said, at the end of the road. Her 122 countries included Liberia and Mali and Sudan. And it was natural for her to open up her heart to those people, not with pity, but as partners. And she knew in those communities and recognized that ancient steel from rural women who carried their children and their communities on their backs. Whether they're from a 600-person town in South Georgia or South Sudan. As the song says, she knew what comes back when you give your love away. And for my grandmother, what came back was this unshakable strength and this powerful faith, and not just an abiding love, but a fierce, determined, adventurous love that sustained her on all of these long journeys. Journeys like Kathy mentioned of her guinea worm eradication, which has taken almost 40 years. But the Carter Center's unwavering efforts and their powerful partners in these tiny villages took a disease that affected 3.5 million people every year in the poorest parts of the world. And this year there won't be millions of cases, Papa. This year we've had 7 total cases. And we're in the last mile because she could see far, and she kept going, was not afraid of these long journeys. Her advocacy for mental health was a 50-year climb that is as remarkable as any other, and has been mentioned already. But if you imagine just how far our society has come in the last 5 years on issues of mental health, and you think that she decided in 1970 to tackle the ancient stigma associated with mental illness, it is remarkable how far she could see and how far she was willing to walk. And that effort changed lives, and it saved lives, including in my own family. She was made for these long journeys. The Rosalynn Carter Institute helps caregivers because you can't journey alone. Even the Rosalynn Carter Butterfly Trail goes 3,000 gardens from Mexico to Canada, help monarch butterflies on their journeys. John Lewis once said that in all of his marches, he only really learned one thing: don't let them turn you around. That was my grandmother to a T. One of my last memories of her was in a hospital. We were there for my grandfather, but she had her own physical limitations that made it hard for her to walk. She had to practice. She was ready to go for one of these walks, and she picked up this cane. And I looked at the cane. She looked at me and she said, "You know, it's not a cane." And I said, she said, "It's a trekking pole." She said it's the exact same kind that those women use when they go to the South Pole. I watched her walk down that hall, that trekking pole, and I followed her. And I just pray that we never lose sight of that path. Amen and thank you.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Ooh, imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. And no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
A reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
Will you stand? You may be seated. I also want to remind you that I'm going to give you some directions for the house, and that if you violate those directions, some of the First Lady's bodyguards might just, you got my message. Remain seated when the procession starts out of respect for the family. You've heard everything about this great soul. You heard that she was from Plains, Georgia. You heard the fact that she loved and she had compassion even for a butterfly. You heard the fact how she loved her grandchildren. And oh, how she loved J.C. Jimmy Carter. But I also have to tell you that she loved J.C. Jesus Christ. And I believe the reason why she did so much of the things she did, because she read in Spanish and English that faith without works is dead being alone. So when she read the word of God, it went to her head. And then it got in her heart. And somewhere in the kingdom of God, Ambassador Young, she decided to put her hands to the things of God. From her head to her heart to her hands. But Mr. President, she made it a habit. From her head to her heart to her hands, and she made it a habit. If you love our First Lady, who is global, make it a habit. Take your passion and make it a habit. Link your passion up with compassion. And then there will be peace. And then there will be love. And then we'll have a house united, not divided. She would say thank you to all the first ladies that came and stopped all the traffic in Georgia and Atlanta. Mr. President, she say thank you from the time you came down to visit President Jimmy Carter and sat in the living room, you and your beautiful bride. She would say thanks to all of you. Governor, she said she would say thank you. But I want to tell you something. To all the staff, she would say thank you. But there's somebody in here that's very important. And only them are going to get what I'm about to say. There's some folks that make all this possible. Their sole mission is to make sure you get home safe. For 46 years, men and women of the Secret Service has made sure that she got home safe. For 46 years, they left their families and traveled with Rosalynn to make sure, Garth, that she got home safe. For 46 years, they gave themselves. Jason, they had ice cream, peanut butter ice cream. They did all the things that she did. For 46 years, they made sure she got home safe. I want to tell each and every one of them, she would tell you, thank you. You got me home safe. Oftentimes, Mr. President, we don't acknowledge those who keep us safe. Rosalynn Carter's in heaven, and she did the work of the Lord in the kingdom all around the world. And Don and all the directors for 46 years got her and her family home safe. And I say thank each and every one of you, those that are standing post and those that are listening on the radios right now. Thank you. And she loves you, and ain't nothing you can do about it. We're going to have the benediction prayer. They're going to sing. And I remind you, please, sir, please, ma'am, the Bible says, I beseech you, Governor, don't move. Father, in the name of Jesus, thank you for this glorious celebration of this wonderful, great soul that has fallen in our midst. But she is not dead. She's alive in each and every one of us. She's alive in 122 countries. She's alive in every hall in our government. She's alive in every nonprofit in this nation and around the world. She's alive. She's resting in the arms of Jesus. We ask that you comfort each and every soul here today as her sons and daughters of the Secret Service take her back home to Plains. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
So glad you're joining us. I'm Karen Phillips.
And I'm Terry Moran, and you are watching ABC News Live's continuing coverage of today's memorial service for Rosalynn Carter, former First Lady of the United States, as the casket carrying her mortal remains leaves this service. A final farewell to the beloved former First Lady in Atlanta, the funeral service there. There you see Melania Trump, Michelle Obama. You can see Laura Bush and Hillary Clinton, Hillary Rodham Clinton, all there, former First Ladies, paying tribute to a woman who really did so much in that office and so much more beyond.
And as, you know, his presidential historians were telling us, as we look at all the First Ladies there, and even the present First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, next to her husband, the President, and even more remarkable, former President Jimmy Carter, in hospice himself, was determined to make it to this service, and he did. Now, the former president being led out by family, and also a Secret Service is there. But really quite remarkable to see the First Ladies, the president, one other former president, along with Jimmy Carter as well, as they pay respects to Rosalynn Carter, who even more so, you know, in addition to all her humanitarian work, Terry, you and I have spoken many times about their magical marriage, 77 years of remarkable marriage, even about to say their final goodbyes together in hospice. I mean, it really is amazing. And
what a journey.
Yep. She is the first one to say goodbye, and now we'll continue to follow what's been a pretty remarkable time of honoring her for the next couple of days. More to come.
Indeed. Let's bring in ABC's Alex Prochet. He's nearby the funeral service there in Atlanta, and also with us, national political correspondent for the Washington Post, Mary Jordan. But Alex, let me just go to you. Set the scene there in Atlanta. What this funeral means for the people of Atlanta, as well as for the people of the country, and this beautiful service to paying tribute to a beautiful, beautiful woman.
Absolutely, Terry. Well, I mean, I can speak as a native Atlantan, as a Georgian. You know, this is a memorial service, really kind of celebrating one of the prominent political figures here, and so I mean, there's this sense of folks that have followed the Carters from Jimmy Carter's time as a state Senate representative to his time as the governor, and then to the White House, and then certainly post-White House. You know, all the work that they have done at the Carter Center. Certainly those images of Rosalynn and him hammering away Habitat for Humanity, and certainly their work with vaccines. And so this is a celebration of all of that.
Mary, you have written the stories and the books and followed all the First Ladies. Clearly, each one of them there today owing something to just the example that Rosalynn Carter set.
It was lovely when Jason Carter, one of the speakers and the grandson of the Carters, acknowledged the sisterhood before him, as he called the former First Ladies. And, you know, he called Melania Trump by name. And that was very intentional. And then he said the sisters, the sisterhood, and he said, and I also welcome all your lovely husbands, which brought down the house there, and a good smile and laugh from both Joe Biden and Bill Clinton. And Judy Woodruff, another speaker, the former PBS news anchor, she's a correspondent there. She had known them since 1970, she said, and met her husband through the Carters, and she was asked to speak. And again, the thing that she noticed was that remarkable display of bipartisanship in this time of division in the country. And she said, I think Rosalynn would be so pleased that you're all here. And of course, I think one of the emotional moments there was when Garth Brooks and his wife, Trish Yearwood, sang Imagine. Those country music stars were personal friends of Rosalynn Carter, and that was her favorite song.
Mary, Alex, thank you. Our continuing coverage. We'll be back on the other side of this quick break.
The holidays on Dale's farm weren't very festive. Until he saved big on a Bluetooth speaker with Amazon's last-minute deals. And now?
Mamacita.
That llama is part dancer, part prancer. Shop last-minute deals now at Amazon.
And the toys that he will leave.
Foul time. We showed up. Let's show out.
3, 2, 1.
Game time. Come on.
Get low, then pick up. Get your hands in the air. It's a stick up. Shake your tambourines, move it quicker. Yeah, I'm shaking down the town. Get the picture.
I got you, baby.
Moving on the floor, gotta love that. How she keep it going on, gotta love that. To the beat like a pro, know you love that. She can shake it to the flow, gotta love that.
Today on ABC News Live, temporary truce still in place as more hostages are set free. We're live in Israel with the